From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast as Andre Johnson
Jr.
Don't forget the JR. The JR is very, very, very important. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button to get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And we are back on this Monday. Is it officially the last week of June? It's getting closer and closer to the last week of June. So we're almost closing the book on the 6th month of 2024. It is flying by. So here we are, another week here in the city of New Orleans. And, we're getting to this point. Saints will report to training camp in about 4 or 5 weeks, late July in Irvine, California. So when you get to this point, you're kind of looking and you're kind of honing in on details of the Saints roster, and I think that's where I wanted to go with the big picture today. Before we get into that, how was your weekend? Did you have a good weekend?
Oh, yeah, it was cool. My mother-in-law turned 60, so we celebrated her over the weekend, and like you said, this is that time, kind of downtime for the Saints. Pelican stuff picking up for us right now. So we find ways to stay busy.
Yeah, it is, but it kind of allows you, when it slows down with the day-to-day stuff, you can really kind of get into some of the details of the roster and what you're looking at. And that's really where I wanted to go with this podcast today, because we know you have a roster. Every player is different in terms of the contracts that they signed. Some players are well into their contracts. Some players just signed a new contract. Some players are going into the final year of their contracts, or in some cases only signed a 1-year deal with the Saints. So it's a contract year. Money is always a motivation. Mm-hmm. Don't let anyone tell you anything differently in life or in professional sports, especially when you're going into the final year of a contract. It is a motivating factor because you want to close out that contract on a high note. So with that in mind, today we're going to look at some of the bigger names that are going to be playing 2024 in a quote-unquote contract year. It's some decent names now that I think could certainly, I don't know if you'd call it benefit, but perhaps the Saints could benefit if these players are motivated going into their contract years to give them, great production, which of course could obviously help the Saints this season. So why don't we go there first? The Saints, the significant contract years in 2024.
Yeah, we've got 7 players, Sean, with a lot to prove as they head into the 2024 season. And we're going to start with Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver. What do you think he's looking to prove heading into the season?
Well, first off, I think he's a guy that can squarely get into the number 2 role, but not just that, firmly cement his case to being the deep threat of this Saints wide receiver corps. He kind of established that last year. He is only 26 years old, had 46 catches, 719 yards, and 5 touchdowns a season ago. He's a big play guy. We know that. And when you run this system, this stretch boot, this wide zone scheme, it sets up a lot of play action, which sets up a lot of one-on-one opportunities down the field. That's kind of the point of the whole offense. And Shaheed is a guy that could certainly stand to benefit that. It should also be pointed out that Shaheed was an undrafted free agent that hasn't been making a whole lot of money over the last 3 years he's been with the Saints, or last 2 or 3 years he's been with the, I forget the exact, because I know that first year he was an undrafted free agent, so it was a little bit of what his official years of service are. But nonetheless, 2024 is the final year of his contract where he's not making a whole lot of money. So for him, there's a lot on the line because A, receivers are getting paid around the NFL. B, he's got big play ability. C, he is given the Saints a bargain over the last couple seasons that he's played, in particular the last 2 years he's played in New Orleans. So I think he's going to be featured a lot. I think he's a guy that can certainly keep going with that big play threat. I know the Saints would like to see him get a little more versatile in his game, so he's not just a straight 9 route or a straight deep post or a straight jet sweep type guy. High-low, I call him, where you're either catching the ball behind the line of scrimmage or you're running deep. Maybe develop a little more diversity to his route running, but nonetheless, you got to be who you are. And Shaheed is a big play guy with, I remember Derek Carr saying it, Tyreek Hill level speed. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. So to me, Rashid Shaheed is a guy that could really benefit from a big year going into this contract season. And he would be a guy, if he has a big year, I could see the Saints being That is homegrown talent. I want to keep that guy. So I think Shaheed is in a really good spot going into the season.
Definitely. And one thing I know, or I assume he would be wanting to prove this year, is that he's a bona fide wide receiver too in this league. And we kind of talked about it when we were comparing last year's roster to this year's roster. If you were to rank all the wide receiver twos in the NFL today, he'd probably find his way somewhere in the bottom half of that list. Because you got guys like Jalen Waddle out there, Devontae Smith out there, Jordan Addison's out there. You know, got some serious wide receiver twos in this league, and Rashid Shaheed right now would be in the bottom half. I think he would like to prove in a contract year that he's in the upper half and a legitimate wide receiver two for the Saints. And if he does that, he can get paid, because you look at the contract that a guy like Devontae Smith got. They're paying wide receiver twos in this league. And, you know, you mentioned him being a deep threat. I think he's got a good chance to prove that he's more than just a deep threat, because you look at Clint Kubiak's system and you look at what he values, and a lot of that is run after the catch. We know Rashid Shaheed has the speed, but we haven't seen him in many run after the catch type situations. You know, for us here at the station at Fox 8, I do a lot of the editing, and one thing I do at the end of the season, I pretty much take every guy and I kind of make a highlight reel of his best plays from the season. And pretty much every play I threw in there for Rashid Shaheed, it was a deep ball.
Yeah.
The one against the Colts, the one against the Panthers. He had one against the Falcons. He had one against the Texans. You know, a lot of deep routes for Rashid Shaheed, and it worked. But you really would like to see him run more of the route tree and be able to catch those slants and turn maybe a 6-yard slant into a 36-yard gain.
I would love to see, throw a 3-yard slant where, a 3-yard slant where you catch and turn it for 25 or 30-yard gain is the same as a 38-yard catch. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's the same difference, and it's a higher percentage pass. It's a less risky pass. Do want to point this out, though, because he signed a 1-year, $985,000 contract. He was an exclusive rights free agent. So 2025, according to what I'm looking at from Spotrac and overthecap.com, he would be a restricted free agent in 2025, which I know you can get tendered, and obviously doesn't have quite the freedom that an unrestricted free agent has. But nonetheless, he's a guy that if he does well, the Saints would obviously like to keep him in New Orleans for a long time. So I do think Shaheed is someone that's the story you want to see develop. When you see an undrafted guy, you take a chance on a guy, you have a conviction on the guy as an undrafted guy. He comes in, makes his way to where when it's time to pay him, like that guy, he proves you right. So I think Shaheed is certainly in that boat. So Rashid Shaheed is one of them again, but he would be a restricted free agent in 2025. What's next? Up next
is a cornerback by the name of Paulson Adebo. What does he have to prove going into a contract?
Well, he's a guy, he was tied for the team leading interceptions a season ago. He was 25 years old. He had 2 fumble recoveries last year. So he was accounted for 6 takeaways last year. That's big, man. That's a lot. And look, the Saints offset some of their pass rushing and run defense issues last year with quite a few takeaways, which was obviously a good thing. That formula can work in the NFL. So Adebo is a guy who's proven to be a rock-solid cornerback number 2. He heads into the fourth year. Yeah, he was drafted in 2021. He had 18 pass breakups a season ago, played 15 games. So he's been durable. He's been reliable. He's been productive. I was maybe a little surprised the Saints haven't gotten ahead of this a little bit. Perhaps try to get him locked down, because if he has another year like this, he'll make some money on the open market. Because if he has another year like this, a team may view him as a number 1 cornerback. He's been a really good find for the Saints in the 3rd round, and I said that when he was drafted, he was coming off the COVID year. He didn't have a whole lot of, I don't know if he sat out, but he didn't have a whole lot that 3rd year. So he had 2 really good seasons in that 3rd year. But basically, if he would have played that full 2020 season and had the same stats he had the 2 years before, he probably would have been a 1st or a 2nd round pick, given his his size and where he came from at Stanford. So I think Paulson Adebo, I'll be very curious to know if the negotiations are going right now in terms of a contract extension. I think the Saints should certainly do that, but very motivated in 2024 because that position, especially if he gets the reputation as somewhat of a ball hawk, 4 interceptions is not nothing. I mean, that's a nice amount of interceptions plus 2 fumble recoveries plus 18 pass breakups, can certainly play man, play the man coverage. So I think Paulson Adebo with a really good year, he might break the bank on this list in terms of what he could get on the open market, whether that's coming back to New Orleans or going to another team. In fact, he would be one if he had such a great year and they weren't able to work out some extension. The Saints may have to pull out the franchise tag on at that point because they would be. I think he would have that much ability on the open market, and there would be a fear of possibly losing him. So we'll see what happens with Paulson Adebo. If they get something worked out before this season or during the season, whatever the case may be. But he played 15 games a season ago, and I think with another good year, he could cash in if this truly is. It plays on the final year of his contract.
Right, and the question when it comes to Paulson Adebo is, do you see him one day being the heir apparent to Marshawn Lattimore? Because we talk about running back as a position where guys don't really play past 30. You don't see a lot of cornerbacks playing that far past 30 either. And Marshawn Lattimore is creeping on 30 years old. So when you look at Paulson Adebo, I mean, can you see him as the cornerback one on this team in the next 2 or 3 years? And if you're the Saints and that answer is yes, then you're definitely watching him this year, because you could make a legitimate argument. Paulson Adebo was the best defender on the team last year. It would be either between him, Carl Granderson, and Demario Davis probably for that title. But Paulson Adebo is certainly in the discussion. So if you hold him in that higher regard, and if you're Paulson Adebo, like you said, if you have a year like last year, whether you're making money with the Saints or whether you're making money on the free market, you've got a lot to prove heading into this year to show the Saints, number one, and show teams in this league, yes, I am a legitimate cornerback one in the NFL.
He signed his rookie deal, 4 years, $5 million. So 1.2 average per season. This year, his base salary goes up to, according to overthecap.com, $3.6 million. So that he has played well for that contract. He's given the Saints a bargain for that contract, which is obviously what you want. This is why draft classes are so important, not just financially, but when you hit on one of these guys, they outplay their contract and they become assets both monetarily and obviously on the football field as well. So I think Paulson Adebo is one with a good year. I think he can get paid. So once again, wouldn't shock me if they come to some kind of agreement either during the season or before the season starts with Paulson Adebo, because that might be something they want to get out in front of. Because as you mentioned with Lattimore, there's also they have Kool-Aid McKinstry, they have Alontae Taylor. So you're talking about a young group of guys at the cornerback position. If Lattimore, if at some point it's the end of the road for him, they do have some young guys in house that obviously have proven, or at least not have proven, but at least they like enough to perhaps look at that position. So we'll see. So I like the Paulson Adebo situation. I think he's going to be highly motivated in 2024.
Up next is another young guy, this time at linebacker. We're looking at Pete Werner to potentially have a big year in a contract season for him.
Yeah. He played 16 games last year, so he was mostly healthy. That was huge for him. 25 years old, 93 tackles, an interception, and 2 fumble recoveries. Second-round pick, 2021. I think, was it 2022? I thought he was one of the best defenders maybe the best defender on the team the first 8-9 games of the season. Then he got hurt, and then he came back later in the season, but it was never quite the same. I thought last year I was expecting a little more out of Werner. I thought he was going to be a breakout star, kind of piggyback on where he was in 2022. Thought last year he got a little undisciplined. He got caught trying to gamble a little bit too much, trying to guess on run plays and taking the wrong gap and taking wrong angles, and wasn't quite the playmaker that he was a season ago playing next to Demario Davis. So I think it's a twofold motivation. One, got to have a bounce back year because I think honestly last year was okay, but he can play better. And I thought in the offseason, he had a good offseason with the Saints. And obviously, if he does well at that linebacker position and he's, has a good year next to Demario Davis, he could command a decent salary on the open market. Now, we know linebacker position isn't huge when it comes to contracts, not like some other positions, but nonetheless, I think if he has a good year, he would have a nice payday waiting for him. So I think Pete Werner, it's a very big year for him because if he does well, he gets paid.
Yeah.
If he does not, I could see the Saints moving on from him after 2024. If it's just sort of an average, especially when you got Willie Gay there, and we'll talk about him in a second, could it be a situation where, they look elsewhere at that position? So I think Pete Werner, it's a really big year for Pete Werner right now.
Definitely, because the turn from 2022 to 2023, it was a bit of a step down. Because if you ask me in 2022, because just similar to Paulson Adebo, where you have to prepare for life without Marshawn Lattimore, one day you're going to have to prepare for life without Demario Davis, because he has been so healthy and so consistent as a mainstay in the middle of that defense. But one day you're going to have to live life without him.
Exactly.
And if you ask me in 2022, could Pete Werner maybe be the guy who you see holding down the middle of that defense? I would have told you maybe. It might be trending that way. If you ask me after 2023, not that guy we saw last year. So if you're asking what does Pete Werner have to prove in a contract year, it's that. It's that he can be that guy who can maybe be the face of the middle of your defense once Demario Davis moves on. Or God forbid, if anything happens to Demario Davis health-wise, can Pete Werner step in and do that job to a comparable level? That's what he would want to prove this year.
So
that's some big shoes
that's
to fill.
an even add another layer to the motivation, because I think he has to have a good year, because I think his I don't want to say, because they're not down on him, but I do think if your contract's up and you don't have a great year, well then do you look elsewhere at that position, or what do they do? Did they draft at that position, or do they kind of let you walk, or whatever the case may be, or did they bring you back on clearly a below market value type deal, reflective of the year you just had? Also, if he has a great year, he's going to get paid. And also, can he be like the cornerstone of the defense for the next, he's 25 years old right now, for the next 5, 6, 7 years, perhaps. So a lot riding on Pete Werner in 2024, because I think he's one of those guys that really flashed in 2022. 2023, I don't think he reached the bar, just wasn't quite the player that we'd hoped he was going to be. But 2024 is a new season, so hopefully he uses it as motivation, and the Saints and the defense all benefit.
One word I've been using all day is prove, and this next guy signed a prove-it deal, and that would be Chase Young, signing the one-year deal with the Saints. He was by far the most high-profile free agent that the Saints brought in this offseason, so he's only on a one-year deal. What do you want to see from him in this 1 year?
When you talk about motivation, I mean, there's a lot of layers of motivation when it comes to Chase Young. First off, guys at his age, 25 years old, at that position, drafted where he was drafted, having like just the rookie season that he had, then the injuries. Then last year he had decent numbers. He had 7.5 sacks a season ago. He's got to prove he can stay healthy, which we still don't know where he's at in his health. That's huge. So that's motivation right there. B, he's got to prove he can stay healthy on the field when he gets on the field, when that happens, because when he does that, he's generally productive. And then C, if he is productive and he is a disruptive force and he is the guy you lean on to be the pass rusher and he is the guy to be the next guy at that position, he's going to make a ton of money. If he can somehow be a double-digit sack guy this year on a one-year deal, 2025, he's going to get paid because he would have proven he could stay healthy for a decent stretch. He can be disruptive at a position, a premier position in the NFL. So Chase Young with a big season, and it could be a situation where he gets priced out of New Orleans because they can't afford him. And I do think that's kind of the risk reward you're dealing with now when you're dealing with the Saints and Chase Young. But I do think with a huge year, I think everybody could win. He could show he's healthy, he can get the big contract, and the Saints get a disruptive pass rusher off the edge in 2024, which is something that they want so badly, and they've invested so much in. So hopefully Chase Young could be that guy. So what am I looking for him? Stay healthy, but you can't just stay healthy. You got to be a guy when it comes to rushing the passer, be disruptive, quarterback pressure, sacks, whatever the case may be. Chase Young's got to be that dude. He should be motivated to be that guy.
I agree with everything you just said, and I'll add some context to that because you mentioned kind of the guys who were in his age. In that 2020 draft class, there weren't really any big defensive ends who were lighting the league on fire or any pass rushers, but there are 2 defensive linemen, 2 defensive tackles that were drafted with him that both got big money deals. Number 1, Derek Brown in Carolina, 4 years, $96 million extension that he signed in April. $63 million guaranteed.
Oof.
Justin Madubuike in Baltimore signed this in March. 4 years, $98 million. $75.5 million guaranteed. That's two guys in his draft. Yep, D tackles. Two guys in his draft class, and that's at the D tackle position. Mm-hmm. Pass rushers are going to make a little more than that. That is what Chase Young is chasing. That is why he signed a 1-year deal with the guy in Dennis Allen who's proven that he's a defensive guy in this league. That's the kind of numbers that he wants, and if he comes out, like you said, and has a 15-sack season, I mean, this is a guy who was billed as a generational pass rusher coming out of Ohio State, and injuries have kind of stopped him from being that consistently. But if Chase Young gives you 17 games and can get, say, 15 sacks, those deals, that's kind of what the conversation is going to start to be for him. And he has a chance to kind of turn his career around in a lot of ways. So of all the guys who we're going to name today, the one with the most at stake, you could argue, might very well be Chase Young.
And I'll add another layer to that. It's because let's just say he can't stay healthy. Then I think the narrative becomes the truth, if you will, about this player. Because if all of a sudden he can't stay healthy again, then he kind of just becomes damaged goods. This is what I'm saying is it's kind of his last chance to show he can be healthy and be that guy. So I think there's the motivation for Chase Young to me should be through the roof right now, because I just think Chase Young is a guy that when healthy, the Saints expect to be a playmaker on this defense.
While we're staying on the defensive line, we're going to talk about another guy entering the last year of his contract, and that would be Payton Turner, who the Saints declined his 5th-year option. So this is a big prove-it season for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the motivation for him, because he's not going to get any big money. I mean, let's face it. He played 2 games last year. He hasn't been able to get on the field. I mean, I don't even know if his roster spot is guaranteed. So the motivation for him, frankly, is to avoid the bust label, Payton Turner, because if he's not there yet, he's dangerously close with his inability to stay on the field and his lack of production when he's been on the field. And it's hard to even gauge, how productive he could be because he's just never been available. So to me, this is you got to get to the point with Payton Turner. The motivation is a good year kind of saves your career, because if you don't have it, you're gonna basically kind of start the journeyman cycle, if you will. Because I don't think if he can't stay healthy or if he's not productive this year, they're not gonna bring him back. And obviously, you're not gonna be a marketable guy on the open market. So I think the motivation for Payton Turner more than anyone else is not money is probably last on the list. It's just to show that you can actually play in the NFL. So the motivation for him, to me, avoid the bust label and show you have what it takes to stick and stay in the NFL, because that's where he's at in his career. How old is Payton Turner? Is he 20, 25, 26 years old? I'm not even sure how old is he. So this is definitely his last chance to prove he can be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, he's fighting for his NFL life, not to be dramatic about it, but he's here for 5 years because the Saints invested a first-round pick in him. Mm-hmm. Any other team did not invest that in him, so there's no guarantee he would find his way onto another roster. And you mentioned the bust tag. You could argue if he doesn't have if this season goes like the previous seasons have for him, you could argue that he would go down as the worst draft bust for the Saints, maybe of the century. I mean, when you look at the first-round draft picks, you could say that there's a lot of guys who maybe the Saints picked and they didn't give them the production on the field that they wanted, but at least they got on the field. Payton Turner really hasn't even been able to get on the field to show you anything close to what the Saints thought they were getting from him. And you look at the first-round picks that the Saints have drafted, his name would definitely be near the top if he doesn't produce this year of guys who just didn't show up for the Saints.
And obviously that would be such a hard pill to swallow, because he was right after Marcus Davenport, you know, so they went from Davenport to him. So if they swung and missed on both those guys, and for both those guys it was prototype guys, kind of leap of faith, because it was, UTSA for Davenport. Houston's not a lower class of competition, but it's not the highest class of competition. It's going to eventually get there, obviously, when they move to the Big 12. But nonetheless, that's kind of where it would sting the most. But I do think a lot of the fan base has somewhat accepted that, because until you actually see this guy on the field, I mean, you have no idea how good or bad he is. And then when he was available a couple of years ago, Granderson passed him up. Yep. The undrafted guy passed him up through true football production, nothing else. So Payton Turner, it is your last chance, I think, in New Orleans. So I think it's a huge year for Payton Turner.
The next guy who we're talking about who's going into their last year of their contract, a guy we touched on a little earlier, and that would be Willie Gay Jr., this free agency, the first free agent that the Saints signed in the cycle of free agency signings. The guy from Kansas City, 1 year, $5 million deal. What can Willie Gay Jr. prove in the black and gold?
Well, I want to see how they use him. That's first thing. I want to see how they use him, how they incorporate him, because, the 3 linebacker thing isn't very common in the NFL right now because of the lack of, a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So you're in nickel a lot of the time. Although there are trends kind of trending back towards a little more base, a little more 21, a little more 12 personnel with 2 tight ends. So perhaps 3 linebackers can get on the field. But Dennis Allen is very creative, and he knows what he's dealing with. He's a very good matchup defensive coordinator when it comes to game planning. And, Willie Gay obviously has a very important skill set, and that is his ability to defend against the mobile running quarterbacks, something that's been an Achilles heel for this defense for quite some time. He has that skill set. I would be shocked. It would be very foolish for the Saints to not utilize that skill set. Yeah. But I do want to see where he could eventually settle into this defense. Is there a competition between he and Pete Werner? Maybe. Is there a way to get all 3 on the field and you use sort of that 3-3-5 nickel package? That's certainly possible. Is it a third down grouping where he comes on and Werner goes off the field? Whatever the case may be, I want to see where Willie Gay's skill set fits within this defense with that speed, sideline to sideline, and his ability to play against mobile quarterbacks. So that's where I want to see him at. And if he can show that, and if he's proven he can get on the field, I think it could be a very good year for Willie Gay, where he could earn himself a nice contract after this season. So I think this was one of those, this was one of their first signings of the free agent class from another team. A good one, and a very, very cost-efficient one when considering what they paid for the 1 year, $5 million. So I think this guy can give you some bang for the buck. And if he gives you a lot of bang for the buck, maybe he'll get more bucks in 2025 and beyond. So I think he'll be motivated. A, new team. He's leaving the Super Bowl champions, right. So new team. B, getting on the field, so fighting for reps and snaps and all that stuff. And then C, obviously the contract as well, which when you sign a 1 year deal like that, given the resume that he's had, Super Bowl champion, you're kind of betting on yourself. So he kind of bet on himself. So hopefully his bet on himself gets rewarded, and in turn, the Saints defense gets better.
Right, and Willie Gay Jr. is a veteran in this league, but he's not old.
Right.
As I was looking at Chase Young's draft class, Willie Gay was drafted with Chase Young in that same 2020 draft class, So he's a guy who's 25, 26 years old, and if he can step in and prove that, maybe you mentioned a potential position battle, if he does get into one with Pete Werner and step into a role where he can be a pretty much every down type of linebacker. We talked about Pete Werner, showing that maybe he can be the guy in this defense for the next 5 years or so. Willie Gay has a chance to step in, and with his play and his ability to combat something that has been the Saints' biggest weakness for years, and that's mobile quarterbacks, he has a chance to prove in and show that, hey, for the next 5-6 years, not just for the Saints, but for anybody who would want him on the free agency market, I can be a guy who can play every single down for any of the 32 teams in this league, and that's what he's chasing after.
That's absolutely. I mean, he wants to be an every down guy, not as just a situational guy, not just
we're playing Lamar Jackson,
right?
This week
Not just
guy.
I mean, he wants to be an every down guy. So he'll be motivated, and that's why the Saints brought him in. And I do think he's a good cultural fit. I think he's from Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken. So it's kind of like his energy, his style, it just kind of blends in well with that locker room. DeMario was the same way when he got here. I mean, he's from Mississippi. He was a guy, I remember talking to him, I said, it feels like you've been here for 10 years. Like, this is your first year. It feels like you've been here for 10 years. So hopefully Willie Gay is the guy that can provide that same cultural fit. And in turn, the Saints defense gets better because of it. That's 2 linebackers we got on this list. So we got some motivated linebackers for the Saints this year.
Yep, and as we get into the last of these 7 guys, it's a guy who maybe was a little bit of a disappointment in his production last year. Definitely a disappointment in the fantasy football world. Juwan Johnson, tight end, someone who already picked up an injury so far in this offseason, and we'll see just how bad it is and how much time he could possibly miss. But Juwan Johnson's going into the last year of his contract. What would you like to see him prove?
Well, this is a lot because honestly, he's got to get healthy. Last year, he was an early training camp kind of hero, and it took him a while to find his footing. He finished strong, 37 catches, 368, 4 touchdowns, played in 13 games, so he missed some games last year. But there's a lot at stake for Juwan because remember, he was always a converted wide receiver. Did well enough to earn that extension, 2-year, $12 million before the 2023 season. But he underwhelmed a little bit last year. Now there's a new set of eyes on Juwan in a new offense that really, really favors the tight end. And, I think for Juwan, this is kind of, it's definitely his last year of his contract, but I do think this is his opportunity to show he can be the true lead dog in the tight end room. I think they've been wanting it. It's just never quite come to fruition. This is his opportunity to do so because he's going to be in an offense that is going to highlight the skill sets of certain tight ends. And if he's not able to do that, I can see Kubiak being a guy that say, you know what, we've got to look at other options here. I think he's the oldest on this list. He's 28 years old. So I don't know monetarily, is he going to get a huge contract after this year if he has a good year where he gets a 4 or 5 year deal? I don't know. But I do think it's important for him to show he truly can be that guy at tight end because, the Saints, this is a position, they've had opportunities to address it, and they've never really gotten the guy there. And I do think with this new Clint Kubiak offense, that's something that they're going to want to have to establish. So just when you look at, sort of the track record of tight ends around the NFL that run this system. So I do think Juwan Johnson really needs to be motivated just because – he's getting a little bit older in his career, going to be 28, and he's got to show it on a consistent basis to be the guy at tight end, or maybe this could be his last year in New Orleans. So I do think there's a lot at stake for Juwan this season. But first things first, you got to get healthy. Juwan has got to get healthy and be available, and then we'll see what happens on the football field.
There's definitely a window for him to, and there's been a window for a while. I talk about it all the time. Last year, the Saints, the 7th least amount of yards from tight ends, not counting Taysom because he kind of did a little bit of everything. So this is a position that's begging for somebody to take it over. Juwan Johnson kind of had that chance last year, and the tight end position is interesting in the league overall because it's probably the smallest percent of elite tight ends compared to every other position. Because you look at the tight ends who you would consider elite, you probably only got about 5 or 6 guys, and everybody else kind of falls in the next tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And Juwan Johnson,
where is he at, right?
Exactly. Where does he kind of fall?
It's always been kind of an unknown with him.
Yeah, and last year was the year where you're like, oh, you got a new quarterback he kind of likes his tight ends because you saw the rapport he had with Darren Waller in Las Vegas. Juwan Johnson could be that guy, and for whatever reason, it just didn't materialize. So hopefully you can get Juwan Johnson on the field at the start of the season because if you don't, that tight end room is looking pretty shallow.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can get him out there in week 1, and if you can, Juwan Johnson, this is your year, contract year. Prove that you can be that guy that the Saints have been essentially looking for since Jimmy Graham.
And then let's just say he blows up. He goes into next offseason at 28. I think he turns 28 when the season starts. Yeah. So what kind of contract would he command at that age? If he comes off of a big year, then maybe he would be able to command a bigger contract to perhaps we realize. But I do think there's a little, because there were times last year where DA would talk about challenging guys. It felt like Juwan Johnson's name popped up more than once. Like it was one of those guys they expected more out of, and he didn't quite get it, and he kind of figured it out by the end of the year. It just feels like we keep waiting for Juwan Johnson to be dominant. It feels like he checks all the boxes to be dominant. It's just a matter of going out and being dominant. So hopefully this is the year because I'm ready for the Saints to have a game changer at this position. It feels like it's been forever since they have a game changer at this position. So I'm ready for Juwan or someone to be the game changer at the tight end position. So I think Juwan should be very motivated because there's money on the line, but also, look, you've been here a while now. If it hasn't happened yet, maybe it's time to get younger and cheaper at that position.
I agree. And then the last guy, I said 7 guys. I have one honorable mention.
You had your honorable mention. Okay.
And that honorable mention would be Adam Prentice, because when you look at the fullback position, it's very antiquated. There aren't many teams in this league that use the fullback in their offense. But one place where they have consistently used that fullback has been San Francisco in that Kyle Shanahan type system. Mm-hmm. You've got Clint Kubiak coming from there, and you could argue if you can't find your way on the field and to have some kind of impact as a fullback in this offense, you're not going to find it anywhere.
I'm not convinced he's going to make the roster. I mean, I think he's right now you kind of pencil him in because he can play special teams, but if they kind of feel Taysom is that guy,
because Taysom can do more than him. So
I think he's in a fight for a roster spot. I really do, Adam Prentice. So that's an interesting one. I don't know if he's gonna, I don't know what he's gonna command financially, but I think he's a guy that he needs a good camp, not just a good season. He needs a good camp because I think he needs to earn his roster because I'm not sure it's guaranteed right now.
Right, because right now, if you're looking at Taysom's skill set and Adam Prentice's skill set, Taysom has a skill set that a lot of guys in this league don't have. So if you're Adam Prentice, you kind of got to look at how can I have an impact in this offense that needs a fullback to play some kind of role, because if I can't have it here, there's 30 other teams that really don't care about the fullback position.
They use those fullbacks. It's not just lead blocker, man. They use them lead blocker, but it's also, getting involved in the passing game, running routes. And you can't just have one route, like it'll slip out into the flat. I mean, if you look at Juszczyk can run routes.
He made big catches in the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah. So I think that's an interesting one because I don't, like I said, I don't know if his roster spot's guaranteed. That could be a sneaky kind of thing to watch in training camp just because Taysom's such a hybrid. So how much is he compensating for in other positions to where you don't keep a guy? You know what I'm saying? Like if you can put him in a bunch of different columns, well, how many fewer players are you keeping because of that? So I think Prentice is one of those guys. Got to show he belongs. So we'll see what happens with him. That's the list. I mean, let's recap it here. Chase Young, Rashid Shaheed, Paulson Adebo, Payton Turner, Pete Werner, Willie Gay, and Juwan Johnson, and Adam Prentice as your honorable mention. That's some guys now. That's a lot of guys that should have a lot of motivation for the Saints this season.
Definitely. You got some starters in there. You got some guys who are kind of fighting for their NFL careers in there. Some guys who could make a lot of money if they come out and prove that they're that guy this season. So it'll definitely be fun to watch and interesting to see kind of what the future of this team offensively and defensively looks like if these guys can kind of break out of their shell and have big contract seasons.
Yeah, it'd be nice because if they do, that would have meant they had a great year, which obviously would have helped the Saints this season, which is what everybody wants. Saints got to have a good year this year. There's no doubt about that. Well, we went a little longer than I thought. It was almost 37, 38 minutes on this pod. We thought it was going to be kind of a quick pod, but we kind of had a lot to say, so it ended up being a longer pod than we originally anticipated. But it was all good stuff, and we'll see what happens with these guys and the rest of the Saints roster when the season begins in a couple of months. Anything else for us today?
I'm good.
Andre Johnson Jr. is good. I am good. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.